My sister demanded I hand over my inheritance because she's struggling as a single mom. When I refused, she screamed, "You owe me for everything." I calmly replied, "I owe you nothing." She ran to our parents, but they were stunned when I revealed her secret fund. I never thought it would come to this, standing in my mother's living room, gripping a folder full of bank statements, watching my sister's face twist from smug confidence to sheer panic. I could hear the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and strong. What I didn't hear, for the first time in my life, was another one of Jasmine's excuses. But before I get ahead of myself, let me start from the beginning. My name is Terrence Moore, Terry to most people. I'm 42, divorced, and have no kids. I work in commercial real estate, nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills, and then some. I live a quiet life in Columbus, Ohio. I've always been the responsible one, the practical one, the one who planned ahead. My sister, Jasmine, is 45, and she's been the opposite of responsible for as long as I can remember. She's been married twice, divorced twice, and has 3 kids from 2 different fathers. She spent most of her life making reckless decisions and expecting other people to clean up the mess. And for some reason, our parents always did. I still remember how, when we were kids, she'd break something in the house, and I'd get blamed for it. When she got a bad grade, it was because the teacher was unfair. When she totaled her first car, it was an accident. Even when she blew through the money my parents gave her for college tuition and dropped out after 2 semesters, they still found a way to justify it. "That's just Jasmine," they'd say. "She's got a good heart." Maybe she did once. But by the time we were adults, it was clear that Jasmine wasn't just unlucky. She was manipulative. And she knew exactly how to get what she wanted. That was never more obvious than when our father died. Dad's passing was sudden. One minute, he was out on the golf course with his friends, and the next, he was gone. A heart attack at 72. No warning. No time for goodbyes. The funeral was a blur. Family, condolences, casseroles we didn't need. I spent most of the service making sure Mom was okay, while Jasmine cried the loudest, soaking up every bit of attention. It wasn't until the lawyer read the will that the real drama started. The estate wasn't massive, but it was enough. Some savings, investments, the house. Dad had split it evenly between Jasmine and me. Simple. Fair. Jasmine didn't think so. "This isn't right," she said, sitting up straight in her chair. "I have 3 kids. I should get more." The lawyer barely looked up. "Your father's wishes were clear." Jasmine turned to Mom, eyes wide, like a child who didn't get the toy she wanted. "Mom, say something. You know Dad wouldn't have wanted it this way." Mom sighed, her face heavy with grief. "Your father made his decision, Jasmine. That should have been the end of it. But of course it wasn't." A week later, Jasmine showed up at my house unannounced. I barely had time to open the door before she pushed past me, tossing her purse on my kitchen counter like she owned the place. "We need to talk," she said. I sighed, shutting the door. "Jazz, if this is about the inheritance." "It is," she interrupted, crossing her arms. "Terry, you need to give me your share." I blinked. "Excuse me." She took a deep breath like she was about to say something reasonable. She wasn't. "You don't have kids. You don't have anyone to take care of." "I have 3. You have a good job. You don't need the money." "I do." I let out a short laugh. "You can't be serious." Her jaw tightened. "Dead serious." I shook my head. "Dad split the money evenly. You got your half. I'm keeping mine." She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she thought she could guilt me into it. "You owe me, Terry." I raised an eyebrow. "I owe you?" "Yes," she snapped. "Do you know how much I did for you growing up? I babysat you. I helped you with homework." I cut her off. "Jazz, we were kids. That's not a debt I owe you for life." Her face twisted in frustration. "You wouldn't be where you are if it weren't for me." Now I was mad. "Where am I?" "Jasmine, I worked my SS off for everything I have. I went to college while you partied. I saved money while you spent yours. I made sacrifices while you made excuses. So no, I don't owe you a damn thing." For a moment, she just stared at me. Then her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Fine," she said. "If you won't do the right thing, maybe Mom will knock some sense into you." And with that, she stormed out. The next day, Mom called. "Terry, sweetheart," she said gently. "Can you come over? Jasmine's very upset." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Mom, she's struggling, Terry." Mom cut in. "Maybe you could help her. Just a little. To keep the peace." I clenched my jaw. Jasmine was doing it again, running to Mom like she always did, playing the victim, making me look like the bad guy. "You know what, Mom?" I said. "I'll come over. But I'm bringing something with me." That evening, I walked into Mom's house, a folder of papers tucked under my arm. Jasmine was already there, sitting smugly on the couch, sipping tea like she'd already won. "Finally," she said. "So, Terry, are you ready to stop being selfish?" I didn't answer. Instead, I set the folder down on the coffee table and slid it toward Mom. "What's this?" she asked, opening it. "Bank statements," I said. "Jasmine's." Mom's eyes scanned the pages. Then she froze. "Jasmine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You have $90,000 in savings? Jasmine stiffened. That's, that's for emergencies. I let out a humorless laugh. Oh, so you're struggling while secretly sitting on nearly six figures. Mom's hands trembled. Jasmine, you told me you couldn't afford groceries. I gave you money from my pension. Jasmine's eyes darted between us. It's not what it looks like. Mom's voice shook. I have been breaking my back to help you while you've been lying to me. For the first time in my life, I saw Jasmine speechless. Mom pushed the folder away like it disgusted her. How could you? Jasmine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked at me, really looked at me. And for once, she knew she had lost. And for the first time, I saw Mom looking at her not with sympathy, but with disappointment. That was the moment everything changed. Jasmine sat there, frozen, her face pale as Mom pushed the folder away. The silence in the room stretched out, thick with tension. I could see the gears turning in her head, scrambling to find an escape route, an excuse, anything to shift the blame. But there was nothing she could say. For the first time, she had nowhere to run. Mom's voice was quiet but firm. Jasmine, you've been lying to me. To all of us. Jasmine's lips parted, but nothing came out. I folded my arms. So, Jazz, what's your next move? She shot me a glare like I was the one who had done something wrong. I was saving that money for my kids, she spat. For their future. I tilted my head. That's interesting, because you've been crying broke for years. How exactly did you manage to save 90 grand while still taking money from Mom, from me, from anyone who would listen? Her hands balled into fists. It's none of your business. Mom exhaled sharply, shaking her head. It became our business when you lied, Jasmine. I have been struggling to make ends meet, helping you whenever you called, while you sat on this. Jasmine's face twisted. It's not like that. Then explain, I challenged. She clenched her jaw. I didn't touch that money because I knew I needed it for the future. You wouldn't understand because you don't have kids. I have to think ahead. Mom let out a bitter laugh, a sound I'd never heard from her before. Think ahead. You? Jasmine, if you were planning ahead, why were you asking me for grocery money? Why were you making me worry about your kids? I went without Jasmine. I sacrificed things so I could send you money. Meanwhile, you had a safety net. Jasmine's eyes flickered with something. Shame, maybe, but more likely just irritation that she'd been caught. It's not that simple, Mom, she mumbled. Mom's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. No, it's very simple. Jasmine stood abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be a TT kid. I came here hoping my family would support me, but clearly, you'd rather gang up on me. I scoffed. Jazz, this isn't an ambush. It's an intervention. She grabbed her purse off the couch. You think you're so much better than me, Terry, don't you? I met her gaze without flinching. No, I think I make better choices. Her nostrils flared. You don't know what it's like to be a single mom. You've never had to raise kids on your own. Everything is easy for you. I leaned forward. You think my life has been easy? I shook my head, my voice low. You weren't there when my marriage fell apart. You weren't there when I had to rebuild my life from nothing after my divorce. You weren't there when I worked 60-hour weeks to make sure I never had to ask anyone for money. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You didn't have to do any of that. You could have leaned on your family. I let out a sharp laugh. You mean the way you do? No, thanks. I prefer to stand on my own 2 feet. Mom wiped her eyes and spoke, her voice weary. Jasmine, I love you. I always will. But I am done financing your mistakes. Jasmine's mouth fell open. Mom, no. Mom cut in, shaking her head. No more excuses. No more guilt trips. No more money. Jasmine's face darkened. I can't believe this. My own family is turning their backs on me. I sighed. We're not turning our backs on you, Jazz. We're just done being used. She let out a bitter laugh. You'll regret this. And with that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Mom sank onto the couch, rubbing her temples. She looked smaller than she had before, like years of stress had finally caught up to her. I can't believe it, she murmured. All this time. I sat beside her. I know. She let out a deep breath. She's going to be furious. I nodded. She already is. Mom looked at me, her eyes filled with exhaustion and something else, relief. But you know what? Maybe it's time. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Yeah, Mom. Maybe it is. Mom sat there, staring at the folder on the table like it was some kind of stranger she didn't recognize. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her tea, only to realize it had gone cold. She sighed and set the cup down. I just don't understand, she said quietly. How did I let this happen? I leaned back in the chair, letting out a slow breath. Because Jasmine knows exactly how to play you, Mom. She always has. Mom winced, like hearing it out loud made it real. But she's my daughter. I softened my tone. And you've done everything you could for her. But that doesn't mean you have to keep doing it, especially when she's been lying to you. Mom rubbed her temples. I should have seen it. I should have known. I hesitated. Mom, did you ever wonder where all her money was going? She swallowed hard. I did. But every time I asked, she had an answer. Rent was high. The kids needed clothes. Something always came up. And I believed her. She let out a bitter laugh. I guess I wanted to believe her. I nodded. That's what she counts on. A heavy silence settled over the room. I could tell Mom was replaying years of conversations in her head, seeing them in a different light now, seeing Jasmine for who she really was. Then, suddenly, Mom straightened. Her kids, she murmured. I frowned. What about them? She turned to me, eyes filled with something new, determination. They have no idea, do they? I hesitated. I doubt it. But, Mom, are you thinking what I think you are? She nodded. If Jasmine's been hoarding money while claiming to struggle, then where has that money really been going? Because I don't think it's been on her kids. I exhaled. You think she's been lying to them too? Mom pressed her lips together. I think she's been keeping them in the dark. And I think it's time they knew the truth. I let out a low whistle. Wow, that's a HLL of a step, Mom. She squared her shoulders. If I don't do something now, this cycle will never end. I studied her, feeling a flicker of pride. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother drawing a line in the sand. And Jasmine wasn't going to like it. 2 days later, I got a text from my niece, Alyssa. Alyssa, Uncle Terry, can we talk? I stared at my phone for a second before typing back. Me, of course. What's up? Alyssa, Mom is losing it. She says you and Grandma are trying to ruin her life. I sighed. Of course she did. Me, did she tell you why? Alyssa, she said you turned Grandma against her. That you're being greedy and unfair. I hesitated, then decided to take a risk. Me, Alyssa, do you know about the savings account? There was a long pause. Then, finally, Alyssa, what savings account? Bingo. Me, she's been sitting on almost $90,000 while telling all of us, including Grandma, that she's broke. Another long pause. Then, Alyssa, no way. Me, I have the proof. Alyssa didn't respond for a while, but I knew what was happening. She was processing. She was remembering all the times her mom had cried about money, all the times she had told her they couldn't afford things, all the times she had guilt-tripped people into giving her help she didn't actually need. Then, finally, Alyssa, can I come over? I sat up straighter. Me, of course. Whenever you want. Alyssa, be there in an hour. I exhaled. This was about to get interesting. Alyssa arrived at my place looking tense. She was 21, the oldest of Jasmine's 3 kids. She had always been the most level-headed one, the one who took on responsibilities way too young because Jasmine forced her to. She stepped inside, arms crossed. Tell me everything. I led her to the kitchen table, where I had the folder waiting. I watched as she flipped through the statements, her face going from confused to shocked to furious. She had this money the whole time? She asked, voice shaking. I nodded. She let out a bitter laugh. Wow. And here I thought she was actually struggling. I stayed quiet, letting her process. Alyssa clenched her jaw. She told me I couldn't go to my first choice college because she couldn't afford it. She made me take out loans, Uncle Terry. She made me feel guilty for even wanting to go. My stomach tightened. Alyssa. She shook her head, laughing bitterly. She let Grandma give her money while she was sitting on this. Do you know how many times she made me put groceries back at the store because she said we didn't have enough? How many times she told me we couldn't afford Christmas presents? And she had this the whole time. I nodded. I'm sorry. She shut the folder, hands shaking. I can't believe I defended her. Every time someone said something bad about her, I told them they didn't understand. I fought with my friends, my boyfriend, even with Grandma, because I believed her. I sighed. That's what she does, Alyssa. She makes people believe her, no matter how much she's lying. Alyssa exhaled sharply. Where do you think all this money really went? I hesitated. I have a few guesses. Maybe she was keeping it as a safety net. Or maybe she spent more than she's admitting. Alyssa's eyes darkened. I bet she did. She always had new clothes, new shoes. She took that trip to Florida last year, remember? I frowned. She told Mom that was paid for by her friend. Alyssa scoffed. Yeah, well, I don't remember a friend. I just remember her spending a lot of time shopping before she left. My jaw tightened. Unbelievable. Alyssa swallowed hard. I need to talk to Grandma. I nodded. She's going to need your support. She grabbed her phone. I'm going over there now. As she walked to the door, she turned back. Uncle Terry. Yeah. She hesitated. Thank you for telling me. I know she's still my mom, but I needed to know. I gave her a small, sad smile. You deserve to know. She nodded, then walked out the door. I sighed and leaned against the counter, rubbing my temples. Jasmine had spent years weaving a web of lies, but it was unraveling now. And the worst part? She had no one to blame but herself. Alyssa left in a rush, her mind clearly spinning. I watched from my window as she got into her car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, before finally pulling away. I knew exactly where she was headed, straight to Mom's. And I knew Jasmine had no idea what was coming for her. I stayed up late that night, waiting for an update, but nothing came. Not from Mom. Not from Alyssa. Not even from Jasmine, which honestly surprised me. By the time I finally went to bed, I half expected to wake up to a dozen angry messages from my sister, calling me every name in the book. Instead, I woke up to just one. Alyssa, you were right. She lied about everything. That was it. No rant. No explanation. Just that. And somehow, that made it worse. A few days passed without a word from Jasmine. That, in itself, was strange. Normally, she'd be in full meltdown mode, either screaming at me or trying to manipulate Mom into feeling sorry for her. But this time, silence. Mom finally called on the third day. She's furious, she said, skipping the pleasantries. I leaned against my kitchen counter. I figured. I've never seen her like this, Terry, Mom admitted. At first, she tried to act like it was no big deal. But when she realized Alyssa wasn't buying it, she lost it. I sighed. What did she say? Mom hesitated. She kept blaming you, saying you turned Alyssa against her, that you're trying to ruin her life. But when that didn't work, she started making excuses. I scoffed. Let me guess. She had no choice. Exactly, Mom said, her voice tight. She told Alyssa that the money was meant for the family, that she was saving it for the right time. I ran a hand down my face. And did Alyssa believe her? Mom let out a humorless laugh. Not for a second. She told Jasmine that if she really cared about the family, she wouldn't have let Grandma struggle while sitting on a fortune. Good, I muttered. Mom sighed. Jasmine didn't like that. She started yelling. Told Alyssa she was ungrateful. Said she sacrificed everything for her kids and that Alyssa had no right to judge her. I frowned. How did Alyssa take that? Mom was quiet for a moment. Not well, she admitted. She told Jasmine that a real mother doesn't lie to her children. Then she left. I let out a slow breath. Wow. She's staying with me for now, Mom continued. She doesn't want to be around her mother. I closed my eyes for a second. She must be heartbroken. Mom's voice was soft. She is. But I think she's also relieved. I nodded, understanding. For the first time in her life, Alyssa wasn't under Jasmine's thumb. She was seeing her mother for who she really was. And it was devastating. Another few days passed. I didn't reach out to Jasmine, and she sure as HLL didn't reach out to me. But then, on a random Thursday evening, my phone buzzed. Jasmine, we need to talk. Come over. No hello. No fake pleasantries. Just a demand. I stared at the screen, debating. Then, finally, I typed back. Me, fine. Be there in an hour. I had no idea what I was walking into. But I knew one thing. Jasmine wasn't done fighting yet. And neither was I. I pulled up to Jasmine's house just as the sun was starting to set. The place looked the same as always, like she was barely holding it together. Overgrown grass, a dent in the garage door that had been there for years, a porch light flickering like it couldn't decide whether to work or give up completely. I sat in my car for a moment, mentally preparing myself. Jasmine had summoned me here like a queen demanding an audience, and I had a feeling this wasn't going to be a productive conversation. Still, I wanted to hear what she had to say. I knocked on the door, and after a few seconds, she swung it open. She looked different, tired, worn out, but not in the way someone does when they've been working hard. In the way someone does when they've lost control of a situation they thought they could manipulate. Come in, she said, stepping aside. I walked in and glanced around. The house was clean but felt empty. Maybe it was just the energy in the room, or maybe it was the fact that for the first time in a long time, Jasmine had no one on her side. She gestured toward the couch. Sit. I shook my head. I'll stand. She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. Instead, she crossed her arms and got right to the point. You ruined my relationship with my daughter. I let out a sharp laugh. No, Jasmine. You did that when you lied to her. She clenched her jaw. She won't even talk to me now? She moved in with Mom. You have no idea how humiliating that is. I shrugged. Sounds like a personal problem. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she took a deep breath, trying to keep herself under control. I called you here to make a deal. I raised an eyebrow. A deal? Yes. She sat down on the couch, crossing one leg over the other. You give me half of your inheritance, and in return, I'll fix things with Mom and Alyssa. I'll tell them you were just being petty, that it was all a misunderstanding. I stared at her, stunned. Then I laughed. Loudly. Jasmine's face darkened. What's so funny? I wiped my eyes. You actually think you still have leverage over me. She stiffened. Terry, listen to me. No, I interrupted. You listen to me. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You have nothing left to bargain with, Jasmine. Mom finally sees you for who you are. Alyssa sees it too. You have nothing on me. She swallowed hard. But, I held up a hand. Let me guess. If I don't give you the money, you'll tell Mom some sob story about how I manipulated you. About how you needed that money more than I do. Right. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I smirked. Go ahead. Try it. See if it works this time. For the first time in her life, Jasmine looked truly lost. She had spent so many years getting her way, bending people to her will, convincing them to see her as the victim. But now, that power was gone. And she knew it. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, I paused. Oh, and one more thing, I said. Alyssa knows about the savings account now. She knows how much money you really had while you let her believe you were broke. And she's smart. Smart enough to go through her student loan records and figure out exactly how much of that debt she didn't have to take on. Jasmine paled. I smiled. So I wouldn't be surprised if she starts asking you some very uncomfortable questions soon. Maybe even legal ones. Her mouth opened, then shut. She had nothing left to say. I walked out, shutting the door behind me. A week later, I got a call from Alyssa. She's panicking, she said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. She offered to pay off some of my loans if I just forget about all this. I chuckled. And what did you say? I told her she could start by paying all of them, Alyssa replied. Since, she had the money the whole time. I grinned. Smart girl. She hates it, Alyssa said, laughing softly. She's acting like she's the victim. But honestly, I don't care anymore. I finally see her for who she is. I exhaled. Good. You deserve better. Yeah, Alyssa agreed. And so does Grandma. Mom was doing better now. Without Jasmine constantly draining her finances and emotions, she seemed lighter, happier. She was even talking about traveling, something she'd always put off because she needed to be available for Jasmine. As for Jasmine, her safety net was gone. No more guilt-tripping Mom. No more controlling Alyssa. No more easy handouts. She would have to figure things out on her own. For once in her life, she was truly on her own. And that was the best revenge of all.